Sue, welcome to the Pets on Film studios.
Thank you.
Today you're going to be discussing puppies and the first 6 months of their development. Perhaps we could start with that, and this is for all breeds.
Yeah, I think that's such an important time in any dog's life is that first 6 months, and I think it's really important that we focus in on that, because if we focus in on that and we get that right, then what we can do is we can prevent problems from arising later on. Training also then becomes very easy, and then we all end up with the dog that we want, which is a socially acceptable, well-mannered dog that fits into the family unit.
Can you give me some examples of what you mean by socialisation? Imagine somebody's watching this film, it's their first puppy, they may not have even had a dog before. What do you mean by socialisation?
I think socialisation is actually, sometimes people get very confused about the idea of socialisation. In my experience, I see many puppies and puppy owners, and people tend to get a little bit confused and think of socialisation as socialising the dog to other dogs, the puppy to other puppies, to adult dogs, etc. But that's only a very small part of socialisation. And actually, it's not a part in the first few weeks that I particularly focus on.
People who don't have dogs or have not had a dog before and it's their first puppy, how would you explain socialisation to them?
Well, I think socialisation is something that people are pretty aware of nowadays. It's quite a common terminology, and when you pick up dog training magazines, dog training books, watch videos, you see that phrase, puppy socialisation. But what's important to understand with socialisation is exactly what it is, because there are so many different elements that are absolutely critical for us to get right to avoid problems later on. So one of the common things people think about with socialisation is socialising their puppy with other puppies, other dogs. Now, what we have to remember is when we normally get a puppy in a normal situation, we have a puppy that comes from a litter. It's pretty versed in dog body language. It's been learning an awful lot of that for the first 8 weeks of its life, with its mother, sometimes with the father there, maybe other dogs in the household, but also with the other puppies in the litter. So although that is an important element, it's not perhaps as critical as some of the other things that are there. So we look at socialisation being getting dogs used to things, puppies used to things. But it's not just about a dog becoming confident. Yes, that is an important element. But the most important element is also teaching that dog how to respond, the appropriate response. And I think this is where there's been some problems with socialisation and with puppy training in general. That what happens is people think about socialising the dogs, and they do a great job. They take the puppies out in the public, they get them used to people coming up to them, they walk the puppy down the street, and the puppy goes up to see somebody or to go and greet another dog, which is great. We've now got this confident puppy that's quite happy in that scenario. The problem is we're not teaching an appropriate response. What we're teaching that puppy is when you see a person, we drag that owner up to that person. When we see a dog, we automatically go up and engage with that dog. But socialisation, it isn't about that. It's about teaching that appropriate response so that as that dog gets a little bit older, then that dog learns that it doesn't just pull you up to every person. Most of the time what you find is that we get owners, and it's very common that we get dogs, adolescent dog owners, where they come along and they go, hold on a minute, my dog's now 6 months old, quite big and bouncy by then, and it's jumping up over people, it's dragging me off to other dogs. Whereas all that could be avoided by actually teaching the puppy the appropriate response.
So if I've got this right, what you mean by the appropriate response is the dog has to learn a set of rules?
Yeah, you decide your set of rules.
What it can and can't do, and when.
Yes, precisely.
It doesn't mean it can't be stroked,
no,
but it's stroked under a set of rules.
That's right.
So when it's a large dog, and say it's a Labrador, it's a big dog, it's learned that it can't just jump up at people. It can be stood or sat to be stroked, but never on 2 legs.
And also, very importantly, not only how it does it, but it's who makes that decision for it to happen. And the decision comes from the owner. The owner makes that decision and takes that control and tells the puppy it can do it. So it's not the puppy deciding it can do what it wants when it wants.
So if a puppy dragged the owner to a person, and even if they got it to sit,
that would be wrong.
That's wrong.
Yeah.
because the puppy decided when to go.
Exactly.
Not the owner.
Yeah. I mean, you don't want to be with an adult dog walking down the street and every time you take the dog out it's pulling you over to everybody or any distraction that's there. What you want is that dog to walk along the street taking no notice, unless you as the owner decide that you want an interaction to take place.
Okay. What would you say on children in that?
I would say exactly the same with children. I think perhaps even more important with children, because we don't want the dogs learning incorrect behaviours or behaviours that are not appropriate or undesirable. And of course with children, if we have a dog that drags up to children that might be frightened of the dogs, or they might become quite animated and that could encourage the wrong behaviour, jumping up, etc., then we're really being quite unfair on the dog if we don't just teach it. It's so much easier just to teach it in the first place. If we teach it in the first place, we don't have a problem later.
Right. And of course, you're not always going to get help from the children's parents.
Of course, yeah, of course.
They just see a puppy.
But also, to be fair, Colin, you know, you go out and about, and I do this a lot myself with puppies myself and dogs, and you walk out, and particularly with a puppy, everybody comes along, oh, it's cute, it's cuddly, I want to stroke it, oh, don't worry, and people go very much over the top. So it's important that an owner understands that they've got an obligation to that puppy. They've got an obligation to teach that puppy, but also control the situation, and it's being able to do that in the right way, just to be able to say, great, I would really love you to engage with my puppy, however, this is how we want to do it. And most people are really obliging.
So, but from the human psychological perspective, do you find sometimes when you start setting the rules to a person that's come up with or without a child to you, and you say, I don't want you to do this, I don't want you to tap, I don't want you to encourage the dog, do you think some people get offended, or do you think you're being...
I think it's how you say it. I mean, if you say, no, don't do this, don't do that, don't the other, perhaps. But there is a way, obviously there's a way of saying things. And I mean, my normal pattern would be, do you know what? I'd love you to help me with the puppy. I'm training the puppy and I really want you to engage with the puppy as part of his socialisation, but also its training. Could you do this to help me? And then most people will be so obliging.
Because what you're doing is you're soliciting their help through a little bit of flattery and a little bit of explaining why you're saying what you're saying.
It's much nicer than going, don't do, do this, do that. Nobody likes that.
Okay. The next question I have for you is canines and habituation. How would you explain that again to the new dog owner and what that means?
I think it's important to just think about what the puppy's already experienced in its life. What you have to remember, that everything that you then take the dog to, and the environment that you put your puppy in, will be an alien environment to that puppy. It's something that they haven't experienced before. So when you think of a puppy that's at the breeders, a lot of breeders nowadays are really good at trying to introduce new scenarios, new situations to puppies and start this socialisation and habituation stage. The two are very interlinked, to be fair, they cross over an awful lot. But the breeders restricted by the fact they've normally got a litter of maybe 6 to 10 puppies, so you know, by number that we've got that, but also we're looking at dogs that aren't vaccinated, etc. So it's limited what they can do. So as a new puppy owner, it's important that you get your dog used to the environment and the things that the dog is going to encounter in its normal life. Getting out there and doing that is critical. However, it's how you do it. And I think the older way, or the way that many people have done it in the past, is to almost flood the puppy. So they immediately take the puppy into a very busy environment and expect it just to adjust and just to cope with that. And often puppies can become overwhelmed. There's just too much stimulus, you know, there's too many things, sights, sounds, smells there that we don't necessarily think of as a human. Because to us, to walk down a high street is a pretty natural thing for us to do. But we're not thinking from the dog's perspective and the puppy's perspective. So that's the first thing that I would really look at, and I would look at building that up, and also not just building it up but also looking at the unique character, if you like, of your puppy. Because if you've got a puppy that's a big, bold, bouncy puppy, then that's going to cope with an environment that is busier, potentially better than maybe a dog that's a little bit more sensitive. And what we don't want to do, and it's very easy to do, is to overwhelm a sensitive puppy and cause it to become nervous, and that of course would have a damaging effect later on. So that's really, really critical when we look at putting a dog into new environments and situations. That said, we've also got to remember that your puppy's got to learn things. It's got to learn that everything in life isn't safe, non-scary, etc. So we've got to teach the puppy to be resilient. If we, and by human nature, we're all a bit like this, particularly, well, I'm probably one of the worst being a woman, but you know, you've got your cute little puppy there, that you've waited ages for, you've been so excited about, you take it out into an environment and it suddenly looks a little bit scared or a little bit overwhelmed, then it's human nature for us to step in and try and micromanage that situation for the puppy. But in life isn't like that. There are going to be things throughout that dog's life that it's going to meet, that it's going to think, not so sure about that. There are going to be things that are going to be potentially scary or make the dog feel a bit uncertain. So in this puppyhood, in this habituation stage and socialization stage, what we can do is we can develop that resilience. And what we need to do is to step back and give the dog or the puppy chance to actually deal with it itself a little bit, rather than step in.
So in essence, you're saying that depending on the breeds, depending on how it reacts to the new stimulus that you're exposing it to, you may need to step back to a less busy area.
Yes,
if the dog's showing signs of being fearful. If the dog's very bold, as you mentioned, some breeds are. Labradors are a great example.
Well, and even individuals within breeds, you know.
So it's incremental. It's a graduation of exposure to all the things eventually it will have to accept in his life.
Yeah.
So that leads me on to habituation in the house, because actually that's where it will start.
Of course, yes. And that's actually because once you've brought the dog into your environment, so when you think about it, and it's an area that we underestimate, we're getting a puppy, 8-week-old puppy, comes away from a litter. It might have been bred in the house, it might be used to being in the house, but it's used to the house where it was bred, the owner's house. It's never known anything different. It's had its siblings around it. It's got its mother there, as an example, and for confidence, etc. And then we go along, really excited. We take the puppy and we take it home, and this poor puppy is like, what the devil is all this? We're in a completely alien situation. So we need to be aware of that. At that point, we're normally quite elevated. We're almost very keen to make sure that the puppy's happy. We tend to pamper around the puppies. We tend to be watching everything. We're keen that they bond with us, and we can almost overdo things without meaning to. Instead of just giving the time for that puppy to just find its feet and adjust in the right way. And that's quite critical. And interestingly, as somebody who's bred a lot of litters myself, puppies that I've kept from litters myself haven't gone through that big break and transition period, and I've had to almost recreate that, because the dogs I found through first-hand experience, the puppies who haven't done that, are not as resilient as those puppies that have had that process and moved into their new environment. But you're right, doing it in the home, so once that puppy is confident within that home environment, its new home if you like, and settled, then you can start introducing things there, and it sets the scene really, doesn't it?
And that's the period where you wouldn't be taking the puppy out.
That's right. Well, you might want to take a puppy out by carrying a puppy around.
I'm going to come to that, but because of the vaccination that you mentioned earlier. So the transference to exposure to what the dog will meet all its life, the geography, the landscape around the dog, the one we take for granted. Prior to vaccination, I take my dogs out under a set of rules. I don't just take them out and walk them on a lead. I don't do that. But I will take them in vehicles. So what tips in that area would you give people to get early exposure without risking them catching a canine disease?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. You know, we have got this period of time where we get the puppy, and then, you know, we can't, well, we shouldn't, because of the risks involved, put the puppy on the ground to walk the puppy around the normal streets, etc., where it's going to go. So what we can do is we've got this time period, and in that time period, we've already said we've got this huge change where the puppies come into this new environment. So we've introduced things within that environment. We can also look at bringing people into the home environment, into the house, to meet the puppy, and we want to do that in the right way. So again, you know, we don't want to have visitors come to the house to meet your puppy and them coming going, oh, it's a lovely little puppy, jump all over me. because again, we're setting the wrong behaviour. We're setting that puppy up for failure later on, and something that we're not going to want later on. So we can actually start bringing people into the house. We can then start looking at, if we want to, depending on the size of dog, particularly govern that, knowingly I've got a German Shepherd puppy at the moment, and I've been, 12 weeks old. I'm physically not strong enough to be carrying him around the streets at the moment. He's just too big. However, what I've been able to do with him is I've been able to pop in a crate in the vehicle. I've been able to go to supermarket car parks, busy places like that, open up the boot of the car so that he can see everything that's going on, and I can kind of sit there, and he's just getting used to and acclimatised to all those sights, smells, etc. When he was a little bit younger, and with maybe dogs that are maybe a little bit smaller, or if you're bigger and sort of stronger than me, then there is, it's certainly a good thing to carry your puppy around. The only thing I would say, and again through experience, because I've been in that lucky position of having a lot of puppies and actually bringing up a lot of different puppies over the years, is I find that the way the puppy responds and how it feels when it's being held is very different than when you put the puppy down on the ground. I think when it's held, some puppies, not all, but some of them feel very restricted, and I think that can make them feel a little bit insecure. Although you would think it would be the opposite, us as humans would think, we're here to, but actually I think the fact that they can't move and make decisions, they can't on a lead and on the floor, they can move, they haven't got that escape.
So they need to have the escape even if they're not escaping.
Yeah.
The fact that they can. It's like counterintuitive, isn't it?
Yeah, so you've got to gauge it, and every puppy's an individual, as you know, so you gauge it on that puppy. It might be, if you've got a puppy and maybe we've got the puppy in a crate and we've opened up the boot so it can see what's going on, it might be that puppy sits there at the back of the crate and not happy about that. So it might be that environment's maybe a little bit too overwhelming for that puppy, so we might go a little bit to a quieter area, or we might put a positive association there for the puppy. We might give the puppy something to take its mind off the situation. So we might go when the puppy's due to be fed, and we might pop its food in a Kong or another similar type of food dispensing type toy, where we can put that association so the puppy starts to go, okay, we've got all this going on, but that's fine, I've got this really nice thing to do. So we can divert attention as well.
Okay, I've got two final points to raise, which I think are interesting. Now, you mentioned the one carrying the puppy and how that could be counterintuitive. You might think this, but actually that this is happening. I've noticed that when people come to your house, most people get up and are excited to see the visitor. And in some way we embrace them or say hello to them. Our voice tonology changes.
Yeah.
And when it changes, the puppy starts to pick up that when it hears the door knock, something exciting is happening.
Yeah.
There are other dog stroke people coming in the house. I think the puppy picks up our excitement and then it starts spinning around the people and they see the puppy. So we have to be aware of that. I always try and get people to come in the house and be calm when they come in, not to create the exciting point at the front door until the puppy's better trained. My final point is, I don't wish to go into behaviour problems, but you mentioned habituation, and you bring the puppy home and it was with a nice secure litter, its mum, all the scents, especially the scents, and suddenly it's gone.
Yeah.
This is where thousands of puppies each year suffer from separation anxiety, a psychological condition of everything it's known. If you took a child at the age of 5 and took it out of the house and stuck it in America or France with an alien group of people, it wouldn't just think that's fine. It would suffer from some sort of
And I think
stress.
most people wouldn't think of that. No. It's such a good comparable.
That.
You wouldn't.
So we know, because we see dogs with separation anxiety, especially puppies. Would you like to comment on that, and that this is a negative? People don't like to think it's a negative, and they say, well, I'll do all these things to make it feel comfortable.
But actually what you're doing is creating insecurity.
Yeah, you've got no choice, because you're going to have, this puppy's going to have to habituate. There's not a choice, you're going to own it. But a lot of people think that this is all positive in the sense that the puppy just comes and enjoys itself. But we know I think separation anxiety is the third most common problem we deal with.
Yeah.
So would you give some ideas on how you would prevent that with more what actions would you do to prevent that?
I think one of the big things is that we tend to go overboard as new puppy owners. We tend to be a little bit overboard. We tend to be very, very free with our attention. You know, any time the puppy comes up to us, it's almost like, oh my God, it likes me. You know, and it's kind of, we're over the top almost with those interactions. We, of course, you know, we've got the problem that one of the first things we're thinking about when we get a puppy home, apart from the fact it's great that we've got a puppy, is we're thinking toilet training. So we're thinking we've got to watch every move because we want to make sure that we get that puppy out and we start the toilet training off. So it's almost what happens is the puppy starts to dictate everything that's happening. And we think of that, we don't even think about it, it's so subtle. So puppy will come up to us or puppy walks over to a particular area and we're kind of like following it around, watching what's going on. So yes, I'm not saying don't take the eye off the ball, if you like, because we've got to think of things like toilet training. But we can do that in, you know, the right way. I mean, I can sit in a room with a puppy and I can watch every move that puppy's making, but I'm not like this, staring at it, you know. I can just be nice and relaxed, but I can be keeping an eye on what's going on and making decisions there based on that. But certainly one of the big things that I see, not just with separation anxiety, and I know you'll agree with this, Colin, but majority of behavioural problems, 99% of the dogs that we see with behavioural problems, the relationship between the dog and the owner is wrong.
The origins in the early days.
Exactly, not just from that's where it comes, and it's human nature. So if we know that and if we can educate the new puppy owner in this in the right way, then we will prevent a lot of those issues, not only on behavioural, but also training becomes easy. So just even things, really simple things like when that puppy comes up to us for attention, we've got to remember that that's going to be a valuable commodity to us later on. You know, that attention is going to be how we want to reward our dog. We don't want to necessarily be piling treats down his throat all the time. We want our attention to mean something. But if we've taught it right at the beginning, right when we first get it, and we're forming that relationship that is going to be established for the next 14, 15 years of the dog's life, and we start teaching that you can come to me whenever you want and get attention whenever you want, it becomes valueless.
I want to discuss early learning for the puppy and what we mean by that, because to one person it could mean obedience training. For me it doesn't. For me it's what it's learning the day it walks in my house and negotiating the furniture of the house, the geography of the house, where it can and where it can't go. And that to me is the early learning, but encompasses socialisation and much more. How would you describe early learning?
Well, I think early learning is something that we very easily can overlook as a new puppy owner. It can be pushed into the background for many different reasons, but what I think one of the main problems is, it's how people view learning and training. Is quite often people think of training as a set thing that they do in a set place, a set time. So they make that effort, I'm going to train the dog, I'm going to train the puppy. And of course, as you know and I know, dogs are learning all the time. You know, they're experiencing things all the time, and it's either something that's positive, it's something that's negative. They decide whether they're going to do it again or they're not going to do it again. So those things are happening all the time. And the problem is when we're not thinking that dog's learning and we're just going around our normal household, normal everyday life, that's when all the bad habits, and we teach the dog all the inconsistency, all the things that we don't necessarily want. So it's changing how people think. And if you think of a puppy when you get the puppy in your home, I think now that this is a clean slate. Everything now, we've got to teach this pup. It's got to learn, you know, as you said, you know, walking around the furniture, you know, walking around where it's got to chew, you know, if it's allowed to pick up a toy, what's the difference between a toy and maybe your slipper? You know, all these things that dog's got to learn. And when you think about it, and even just little things like that, it's an immense thing. I mean, if we had to do it as humans in one hit, in a couple of weeks, wow, we would never achieve it. No. But we expect it, and that's the problem. Our expectation can be wrong. So if the expectation of the new puppy owner is right, and they can look at that and take that on board, then we become a lot more patient. We can start to manage situations so that we can manipulate environments and learning experiences in a positive way, so that that dog will encompass a confident, and it will develop, become confident and be under control and not have issues later on. And when I talk issues, I don't necessarily mean behavioural problems. I just mean general manners, general control. That's what we want as a family pet.
Okay, well, I'm going to ask you a quite tricky question.
Okay.
And this one is, so again, a new dog owner's watching and listening to your advice as an educationalist. Give me several examples of what a puppy will not purposely learn from the owner's point of view, but accidentally learn, which is negative, but we don't know we're teaching it. So by our behaviour and how we make a reward with the dog, we don't know we're teaching them something, which most people do with puppies, because I could think of a few, but I'd like to hear what yours are. They don't know they're doing it.
Well, firstly, it's not a tricky question, because it's something that I see all the time with dogs that I help people with, not just with the puppies. The big one is attention. You know, we get the dog, it comes along, the puppy, it's cute, it's cuddly, it looks at us with those beautiful eyes, and we go, oh, I love you, you know, we give it attention. It might not even be as dramatic as that. I mean, obviously, you know, I'm being a bit dramatic on that, although we do that. But it could just come along and we can acknowledge. And that acknowledgement can be eye contact, it could be as subtle as that. It could be, it makes us do something, you know, do you want to go out? Are you ready for your food? Are you doing this? Are you doing that? So what we're doing is we're teaching that puppy that actually whatever it wants, whenever it wants, it just has to ask for it and it gets it. And life's not like that later on.
Or nudge or wink.
Yeah.
Or do something that gets your attention.
Yeah.
A bit like a child in some ways.
Yeah, definitely. And they've got to understand boundaries, and they've got to understand that they can't just get what they want when they want. Because at the end of the day, society dictates that that dog has got to be under control. So and not only that, but you know yourself, if you live with a dog that understands those rules and respects those and responds to you, training's easy, life's easy, it's an enjoyable relationship.
So you described the attention that's the dog's kind of teaching you to react to its demands.
That's right.
So what do you respond to? What don't you respond to?
So instead of that, so the way I always look at it is, if we can try and be strict with ourselves, not always easy to do, but you know, we need to be doing this, is if we can think of, if there's attention to be given, is that we initiate it. It's never initiated by that puppy. We decide to initiate it, we give that attention, we also end when that attention ends as well. So I'm not saying that, you know, you keep puppies around and it comes up and it wants a fuss and we have to ignore it. Yes, we do at that point. But once the dog doesn't, or the puppy's out of the way and isn't demanding that attention, then what we can do is call the puppy over to us. Simple, it's worked for it, it's only a recall, but it's putting something there. Nice positive association then. We can then give that puppy all that attention we would have done previously, but now it's in our time and we've actually asked the puppy to do something for it.
Something which is useful later on.
Exactly, yeah.
And the puppy doesn't know, and a lot of people don't know.
But it's all foundation, it's all subtle foundation, isn't it, Colin? Yeah.
Okay, Sue, well, thank you very much for that. And I hope people watching listen and enjoy your tips and understand how the dog feels, and they've learned something to look after and habituate, socialise their puppy.
Thank you.
Oh, God.